I do.
Emily, in one of your books, The Family Firm, you advocate for applying business principles to family decisions. How can dual career couples implement structured decision-making processes to manage parenting responsibilities effectively?
I think in some ways, the tools I talk about in that book are most applicable when we have dual career couples where we're trying to do something which I think is very hard, which is to have two jobs and children and run what is effectively a sort of small to medium sized enterprise, which is our household. And my position here is that many of the tools we use at our jobs, we are using there because they help us work productively with other people, to divide tasks, to do things efficiently, to understand who is going to do what, and to have clear expectations about what's going to happen and when it's going to happen and who's going to own it and have responsibility. And those are all things which are very valuable for household tasks also. So to know, like, I am going to own the task of meal prep, and that's going to mean all of the subtasks, planning what we're going to eat, figuring out how we're going to acquire the food to eat it, making the food, dealing with serving the food, whatever it is, that, like, knowing that I'm responsible for that and that you're responsible for something else lets us kind of divide those things and, again, sort of have that set of expectations. And where I think we can talk more about this, but like where I think many couples sort of run into conflict is when I have a set of expectations that is different from what my partner has a set of expectations in terms of who's going to do what. And when I think you're going to do something and then you don't do it, I get understandably upset. I think many of those misunderstandings are because the other person did not know that they were expected to do the thing. And so, there's really this kind of like making, like, almost generating common knowledge that we would always do at work, that we don't always do at home. And, one of the things people get uncomfortable with here is this idea of like, well, I don't love my colleagues. Like, I don't like, we should just be able to make it work at home because, like, we love each other. And isn't that the way, you make things work? And I think the reality is, like, you can love someone and still, like, want them to follow up on the conversation with an email that sets out the context of the conversation. And, like, those things can exist together. And in fact, when you are angry with someone because they didn't do what you thought they were going to do, and they're angry because they didn't know the expectation that you had and you have a disagreement, that's not a place where then you're like, okay, let's, have a romantic interaction. That is just a place where everybody's mad. And so somehow, like, these things can make your marriage better, not more transactional.
Thank you so much for that explanation, Emily. I do want to say I do love both of my colleagues, Brian and Christian, though, for the record, and this. But what strategies do you recommend then for couples to divide child care tasks equitably, so that we're both really ensuring we feel supported and engaged in that parenting process?
Yeah, so I think there's actually two phases of this that are important. So I think there's a first phase where we kind of think about what are the tasks and how we're going to divide them to begin with. And that's a kind of set of decisions that need to be made, not every week, but not just once. So, every 6 months, every year, depending on how old your kids are, there's going to be some change in what's expected. And that's a point at which I think people could sit down and say, here are the things we need to cover in the household. Here's who's going to do what. Here's how we're going to divide it. And a really important part of that conversation, which I think comes up a lot when we talk about invisible labor, is the idea that, if you're responsible for a task, that's really the whole task. It's not, cooking dinner is like being responsible for dinner is not the same as like boiling pasta and putting it in a container. That is a portion of being responsible for dinner. But being responsible for dinner is, thinking about making the pasta, making sure the pasta's in the house, making the pasta. Those are the whole thing. People call that different things, total responsibility transfer, or there's different forms of that word. So I think there's that first piece, which is just deciding what are the things that have to happen and then allocating them. And then there is an important follow-up piece, which is just stuff comes up over time, and having a clear way that we're going to communicate about how is this going, what unexpected things have come up, how are we going to manage those. I think that I mean, weekly family meetings are kind of a very common approach that I think can work for a lot of couples, to just sort of sit down and say, okay, like, let's just check in about, like, how is this week going? Is there stuff coming up? In our house, we don't use meetings, we use emails. We send sort of our household has two, like, core emails. I'm in charge of one, my husband's in charge of the other. There's a week email, which I send at the beginning of the week to my children and our nanny and my husband, that says, here's kind of what's happening every day. And people are expected to write back and say if they disagree or if I made a mistake or whatever. And then there's a weekend email, which he sends, which is, here's what's happening on the weekend, with the same set of expectations. And so I think for us, that's really, really useful. And it's something we've come up with over time because it sets those expectations so clearly. And then we kind of all know sort of what to expect. So some version of sort of putting together the parts of that work for your family. Again, just so much of this is about setting expectations and surfacing conflict early and not in the moment. Like deciding on Sunday who's going to leave work early to pick up the kid because school only goes until 1 p.m. for God knows what reason this week. Like deciding that on Sunday, even if it means arguing about it on Sunday, is so much better than arguing about it at 12:45 when, like, you forgot and everyone is actually in a meeting right now and everyone thinks their meeting is so important.
I almost jumped out of my chair with excitement when you said that you do this through email, because I thought we were the only ones. We used to meet weekly to talk about money and household management, but because I'm doing most of the heavy lifting, that we still do it. Okay. It's not weekly. It's more bi-weekly. We've been married for 23 years. So, we're in a groove. We do it through email because we're always coming and going. We're tired at different times. Kids are everywhere. And when you put it in an email and you keep that email, you're not forgetting anything. You can do it at a time where you're not stressed out. And I love the fact that your husband has the weekends and you have the weekdays, the delineation of those two. I'm going to steal that. I love that. Listeners, please, if you're a busy dual career couple and you're coming and going at different times, I'm telling you, the strategy works. And the fact that a world expert uses the same strategy makes me feel so much better. So thank you, Dr. Oster.
I love to validate people's choices.
Now, I got to ask too. So you do the emails. Do you also have like a linked like family like calendar?
Yes.
Well?
Yeah. All of the family calendars are shared. The kids have calendars. We have calendars. The babysitter has a calendar. We can see all of those things. So there's a lot of infrastructure like that. But the emails are just, a helpful. The emails help us navigate, like, how is dinner going to be? Dinner is not in the calendar. I mean, the existence of dinner is, but not what we're having. And so, among other things, that's like surfaced in the emails.
Right. This is not like, you're writing paragraph on paragraph. This is bullet points.
Yeah, it's bullet points. It says Monday. And if there's because the thing is, at this point, you're in like a routine. I have the shared calendar. Everyone can see school is on Monday. So it's like a way to say, often they're like, Monday, everything's normal. Dinner is pasta. Here's who's responsible for putting the water on. Tuesday, everything is normal. Mostly it's like that. Sometimes there'll be sort of something to work out. But yeah, this is short. These are like very short emails. This morning's was like 6 bullet points from my husband about the weekend.
Okay, can we change lanes and talk about parental leave? It's a big topic, but when both parents have demanding careers, like dual career couples who are listening to this podcast, how can you approach kind of who takes parental leave and when, so that you're maximizing, the time off to spend with your child, but also balancing your career needs?
That is a very hard question. And so let's start with the sort of basic thing that not everyone has access to parental leave, but, assuming that we're sort of in a dual career space where everyone has some amount of parental leave. I think one way to ask about this is like, what would be the sort of optimal way to to take that. And, we know a little bit about that from the data. And I guess here is kind of how I would put it together. Like, generally, mom's going to take, the birthing parent is going to take the beginning of the leave because there is a fair amount of recovery from childbirth. And that is just like a necessary piece of that. And, we look at sort of what are the impacts on career, what are the impacts on baby. Something like 4 months of leave seems to be an amount that works for many people. And when we have extensions past 4 months, that for some people that's great. But when you look at like the outcomes for the baby, the 4 months seems to be like the most important. That's where we have the most evidence. There's a little bit of evidence about overlap, actually, particularly at the beginning. So there's actually some data from Sweden that shows better outcomes for mom and baby if dad can take some time at the beginning and actually can take some time flexibly. There seems to be a case in which like sometimes you've had a baby like for 6 days in you have mastitis. That's actually a really helpful time to have somebody home to help. So Sweden has this system called daddy days where you can take in addition to a bunch of other paid leave, you can take flexible time that overlaps with your partner early on. And extrapolating from that, it kind of suggests if you had an option to have both parents home for 2 or 3 weeks at the beginning, that might be a good use of some of the parental leave or some of paternal leave. My view is that if you can then take the rest of the paternal leave in a non-overlapping way, for many couples, that is very helpful in getting to a place where there is more equality in ownership of the baby. So there's something very specific about being alone with your kid for extended periods without the other partner that allows you to develop a set of routines, a set of expectations, a confidence in being able to be with the baby or kid alone that many men unfortunately don't get the opportunity to develop. And I think that can then be sort of somewhat detrimental to some of these task splitting things that we talk about. If I feel like I know how to do this and I've been home with the baby for 4 months and I'm the only one who can do this stuff, it's very easy for that to build on itself. And if dad feels he is not confident, he is not comfortable being alone, and he's just going to pass the baby off when it starts to cry, then mom decides, well, of course, I don't want to give it to him because then he's just going to pass it, and we kind of get into a bad cycle. And having just a period in which the other partner is in charge of the baby all the time for all of the day, I think that's actually pretty valuable for sort of long-term equality.